Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hello, everybody. Happy summer. I am celebrating summer. I'll make this my personal update by chopping off most of my hair. I did that yesterday. I mean, I have hair. It's just very short right now. I feel like for the past handful of years, certainly since my kids have been born, I alternate between growing it out and then I just chop it all off. And I keep wanting to feel that one of those two hair types. Also when my hair's longer, I tend to like straighten it more or process it more. And when it's really short, I don't do anything. I just wear it sort of curly and spiky. And I keep wanting to feel that one of those two things is like my truest, most actualized self. And then the truth is, I just like different ones at different times. So I think my greatest level of development currently is accepting that I'm not just one thing. I'm gonna mix it up. I feel like there's so much to say about hair and sense of self, and we could do a whole conversation about that, but I'm just gonna say only that for today. So this podcast is part 2 in what I think is going to be a 3-part podcast series about how to make sure that you have energy in your tank at the end of your work week. On some level, this topic is really just about how do you save energy at work while not having your work quality suffer, and ideally, in many cases, even increasing the quality of your work output. As a result, this topic kind of combines several of my favorite subtopics to work on. You guys know I love talking about energy. I also love talking about goals and dreams, and I love talking about performance. How are we performing? And if you haven't yet, I would still recommend starting with part 1 of this series, though each of these episodes can stand alone. But I think in that podcast, I kind of give this really nice, solid intro into why this topic matters and why it matters even if you're not concerned about energy, even if your only goal is higher performance. Paradoxically, holding back a bit of energy in the tank, I think, is one of the necessary preconditions for improved performance, in my experience. And then, of course, if your goal is to have energy for any kind of outside of work reason, to finish writing your novel that's a passion project, or just to have the energy to apply to your next job, obviously you need this too. So in part 1, in my previous episode, I said that I was structuring all of these episodes around sort of enumerating each of the objections that a client might tell me, all the reasons why they would not be able to save energy in their tank at the end of the week, and how I would address each of those. So the first 2 common reasons why they can't save energy, which I shared in that episode, were number 1, maybe they just completely forget about saving energy. Like, whoopsie daisy, this can be a genuine problem. And if that's you, I suggested a very lightweight, flexible awareness and intention practice. The second common reason that they tell me is that they're not convinced that this is actually good for their organization. They're convinced that it's perhaps selfish. And if that's true, then they need to sell themselves on this. And that takes repetition. It will not typically happen by chance. You have to do it on purpose. So those are the ideas that I shared in the previous episode. In this episode, I have 2 more ideas. And in true Katie Seaver fashion, they are simple at the highest level, but there's a lot of subtleties that I think do really matter. And then I also have a bunch of really juicy, specific client examples for you to feast on. So let's do it. So the third objection that a client will give me, the third reason why it's definitely not possible for them to keep some fuel in their tank at the end of the week, is that they just have too much to do. And as with all things, having too much to do will take a lot of different, very specific forms. So a client might say to me, Katie, the project that I have just takes X amount of time. This is just the time it takes. Or they might say, look at my calendar. There's just too many meetings that I have to go to. Or they will say, there's this huge deadline and I just have to do these 4 projects and each of those take X number of hours. And, what can I do? And another important characteristic of this kind of thinking, which you've probably heard in these little examples, is that it just feels like a fact. It's an immutable fact of the universe that there is simply too much to do. And on one hand, the high level insight here, I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to have to prioritize. And as a result, they're going to have to cut some things. But I would almost never say it quite so simply to a client when we first start that conversation. Because if you're someone who is tired and overwhelmed and someone just says to you, you need to prioritize better and you've got to cut some things. If it were me, my energy towards them would be like, well, fuck you. Because, it feels so true when I say that. It feels impossible. It feels like the other person is misunderstanding an immutable fact about your workplace. And even more importantly, that advice is so high level as to be almost useless. Because for everyone, there are so many extremely personal reasons why they're not prioritizing and why they absolutely cannot, under any circumstances, cut things. So there's a few different coaching approaches here, some of which lend themselves to a podcast and some of which don't. If I'm being honest with my actual one-on-one clients, this is sometimes a moment where we will go deep into the weeds together. Like, show me your calendar. Let's discuss which meetings can and can't be cut. Or let's make a list of all the projects you need to work on this week. And let's figure out what's actually most important and what isn't. And maybe there's something else you're avoiding that we need to add. More on that actually in a little bit later in this podcast. And then once we're in the weeds and have made progress on the specifics of your given week, say, then we can develop some rules or frameworks for prioritizing and cutting going forward. So in general, I cut this kind of meeting, or in general, I say no to this kind of project if it meets these three criteria. But we sort of go from the specific to the general. Obviously, we can't do this on a podcast. So instead, I want to offer you 3 ideas within this given section. But team, can you see how I have so much to say about this topic? Okay, so 3 things. The first thing I want to offer is a reminder. That reminder is you already prioritize and you already say no to things. I'm going to say that again. You already prioritize and you already say no to things. I know this about you because every modern worker already prioritizes and already says no to things. In my experience with clients, all of my clients are already saying no to things, already turning things down in at least some situations. The key here is that they find certain reasons to be compelling and certain reasons not. So they might feel that the reason I am double booked is compelling, or the reason I'm completely overloaded with work past all reasonable standards and I'm working 12 hours a day or working on the weekends, they find that to be compelling. They find those reasons to be compelling enough to say no to meetings or additional work. On one hand, this may sound obvious, like, yeah, of course I say no when I'm triple booked for a meeting. But there's a really key mindset point here. And that's by which I mean a point about your thoughts. You have already decided in your brain that a certain thought gives you permission to turn things down, or that makes you even sort of unafraid of saying no. And you have decided that another thought does not give you permission or allow you to be unafraid of saying no. You decided that it's okay to say no when the thought is, for example, to do this project, I'd have to work all weekend for a month. You've decided that that's allowed. And you've already decided that you can't say no when the thought is, to do this project, I'd have to give up the hour that I was going to devote to long-term strategic thinking. Just to give an example, I want to say those thoughts again. So you've already decided it's okay to say no if you'd have to work all weekend for a month, but it's not okay to say no if you'd have to give up that hour you were going to devote to long-term strategic thinking. But you could, at least in theory, change that standard. Say that one again. You could, at least in theory, change that standard. I'm feeling that one in my body. Okay, for some people, just that new offering, I already know how to turn down meetings and turn down or delegate projects. For some people, that's a really powerful thought. It's a thought that lets them tap into what they already know how to do. So a client of mine from a little while ago who worked in the healthcare strategy space, she was swamped, especially with meetings. Like, there was just no time to get work done. And then of course, she's overwhelmed and burnt out because all the meetings, and she doesn't actually have time to do her real work. This is such a common problem for modern knowledge workers. And she was a great example of a person who was already turning down a lot of meetings because she would get double and triple booked all the time. That was just the kind of job she had. So in our coaching, I offered her exactly this thought. You already know how to turn down meetings. You do it constantly. But your current standard is that you can have 8 hours a day of meetings. So we need to now cap it at no more than 6 hours a day of meetings, and ideally maybe even 5 hours. So you have a little bit of time to think and do your non-meeting work. Ooh, I'm just feeling that one in my body as I say it. It's edgy, right? And of course, as we would expect, fears and hesitations came up for her. We coached on them. And that's in part why I talked in so much detail about being sold on why, getting some energy back is valuable for your organization in my last podcast. So please, I think that's like the core of a lot of this. And so using that approach and some others, I did address all her fears. But for her, even just this thought, I already know how to turn down meetings. I already do turn down meetings. I'm just drawing the line at 8 hours of meetings, and I need to draw the line at 6 hours of meeting instead. That was very powerful. Sometimes that reminder alone can be really impactful. So that's the first thing I wanted to offer to help you prioritize and frankly cut some things. And if you are like many of my clients, you are listening to this thinking, yeah, the thought, I already know how to do this, it's not enough. So this is where I'll get to my second point of 3. For many of my clients at this point, they will begin to tell me all the ways in which it's different. Like, people understand if you turn down a meeting because you're double booked. They don't understand if you're doing it just to do strategic thinking, ditto for projects, whatever it is. So what's coming up with objections like this is that your brain is basically saying that someone important, your boss, your coworker, your direct report, is going to be disappointed or upset if you don't go to that meeting or do that project. And again, I'm not here to say, oh, that doesn't matter. Be indifferent to these people's preferences. I mean, of course this matters. These people are important for your work. But to some degree, again, this is where being sold on how this is valuable and frankly best for your organization matters. Again, that's why I spent so much time talking about it in my previous episode. Because if you really believe that it's best for them, not just for you, for them, it's much easier to handle a little bit of pushback from those key stakeholders. But today and here, I want to offer another coaching move, another thing that I will often say that seems to land with a lot of clients in these situations. And that is that I will give the example of my own kids and a parenthood. I now have 6-year-old twin boys. Oh my gosh, guys, they just turned 6. And my kids think that they want a lot of things, and they are frequently upset with me when they don't get them. So I'm going to give a personal example here. One of my kids is going to summer camp right now. And they give these children at summer camp some kind of credit card for their camp store. I really like this camp. It's just a day camp, but I do not like this credit card thing. And the camp store has chips and fruit snacks and granola bars and Powerade. And the camp is like, oh, we don't sell candy at the camp store. I think implying that it's healthy. And I'm like, if you're selling granola bars and chips and fruit snacks and Dippin' Dots, I mean, I'm not sure we can claim this is a healthy snack place. Anyway, but I give my son $5 to spend every week because I'm not a cruel mother and I don't want him to be deprived of the experience of going to this junk food store with his camp credit card and getting some treats. And despite the fact that he does have money on his credit card, all he does, multiple times a week, is complain to me about how every single other parent gives their children $10 and $15 and $20, or he claims more per week to buy treats. First of all, treats are $1 each. So my child does not need 20 treats in a week. This is getting ridiculous. But on a deeper, more important level, my son knows what he wants, at least in the short term, and he is frustrated with me, vocally frustrated, that I am not giving it to him. But my job is to think bigger than that and give him what he needs, even if it's not always what he wants in the moment. And yes, to be able to kind of withstand a little bit of pushback from that. And if we're bringing this back to work, your boss, your colleague, your direct report who wants that very long hand-holding meeting where they didn't actually gather their thoughts beforehand, and frankly, that wastes your time. One of the clients I've mentioned had one of those on her team. On one hand, that person, they genuinely want you to do that project or go to that time-wasting meeting. Of course they do. Just like my son genuinely wants $20 a week on his stupid camp credit card. On the other hand, just like my 6-year-old, they don't know what's best for them. They're thinking short term. They're not actually thinking about how to get the best performance out of you in a bigger sense. Your colleagues or boss or direct report do not understand that if you completely empty yourself this week, you cannot give your best work. You lose your ability to be strategic in your thinking or as cognitively sharp as you could be. Because those people, they're not in charge of managing your cognitive sharpness. They will suck every ounce of blood right out of your arm if you let them. But you know who's in charge of managing your cognitive sharpness? You. You are in charge of getting the best performance out of yourself. So you have to make sure that they don't suck you dry. That is only your responsibility. And what it will feel like is what it sometimes feels like when I send my kids upstairs to take a rest in the afternoon. on a weekend. They're annoyed. They'd rather keep playing. I get it. And also, I know better than them what they need. And I think we get this pretty intuitively with parents, but it applies. The reason why I keep giving this drawn out example is because it applies to work too. You know better than them what you need in order to deliver the highest quality work. And just in case your brain is getting kind of squirrely right now about like, will cutting projects alone improve my work? It's just cutting. I mean, my answer to that is maybe. That alone might do it. And if it doesn't, we will need to strategically add, which is what I'm going to talk about in my next point. But just that thought alone, that it's normal that somebody on your team will be a little dissatisfied. It's normal that they're going to want to suck you dry. And that's because they do not know how you perform best. And so you will need to manage them just like you would manage some cranky kindergartners in my household. Yeah. I think that's a very powerful thought for many of my clients. And even just me shifting that, having a conversation about parenting sort of, again, gives them another context that they recognize and helps them kind of hold firm. In many cases, again, that can be a really powerful coaching move. So that's the second thing I wanted to say about doing too much and prioritizing and cutting projects, this sort of second all-purpose thought that can be really helpful. The third thing I wanted to say about cutting projects is that often what it comes down to is that my client will have all of these super specific, complex, squirrely, and very, unique to them and their particular job reasons. I can't untangle every single person's specific reasons on this podcast, but I thought the third thing that I would do that would be of value would be to share another real client example with 3 different thoughts that were keeping my client from actually reducing her project load. I like to give these real client examples for 2 reasons. One, even though it's so specific, I think you may recognize your own thoughts in them. So many of our brains work similarly. And second, I think that mindset work can be tricky to understand in generalities, but can be so resonant in the specifics. So I want to give you some specifics. Okay, so this client that I'm going to share about was a mid-level manager at a big tech company. She was totally emptying her tank every single week. And when we dug into it, there were at least 3 reasons why she couldn't actually reduce her workload, why she wouldn't sort of allow herself to reduce her workload. First, she had the thought, if I didn't set the right parameters in the beginning, I need to fix it myself. I'll say that one again. She had the thought, if I didn't set the right parameters in the beginning, I need to fix it myself. So this client, as I mentioned, she's a manager. She had a team, and as is true at many organizations, a lot of things were happening all the time. And what would often happen would be some new need or project would come up. She'd try to scope out the project for her team, and sometimes she would be missing key details that were later uncovered, or she would realize that maybe she just didn't fully understand what was needed at the beginning or whatever it was. The net result being that she didn't correctly convey the project to her team at the absolute beginning. And then, because she had this thought, if I didn't set the right parameters at the beginning, I need to fix it myself, she'd fix it herself. And on one hand, you can see how my client was a wonderful, caring manager and a highly conscientious person. She wants to scope things out so carefully for her team. And if there's any mistake, she basically blames herself and takes all the work for herself as a kind of punishment. And you can also see how that is kind of counterproductive to her actually being maximally effective at her job, and how it would absolutely lead to burnout for her. So a big part of our work was even, number one, isolating that this thought existed for her. That before, I think she had this sort of haze of like, well, I can't possibly give up this project or this work, but sort of isolating that this very specific thought was the true reason, that she felt like it was her responsibility to scope or explain a project perfectly at the beginning. And if she didn't, she should fix the problem herself. And most of us don't walk around with our thoughts isolated and purified like that. And even just the act of doing that is super, super impactful, because as soon as you see it, you begin to say, oh, that's not that useful to me. And then once we found it, we started to play around with some new thoughts. And the alternate thought that we came up with that felt the most resonant to her was, if I didn't set the right parameters at the beginning, my team has to fix it. Remember, she used to think she had to fix it? Let's say that again. Could it be true that if I didn't set the right parameters in the beginning, my team has to fix it? And when we're framing this for her, it's not like an asshole boss kind of, my team has to fix it. It's just in a way that's honestly practical and realistic, that in a fast-moving organization, scope is going to shift over time and the team has to adapt. And could that be part of their job? Because realistically, she's never going to perfectly set things up. And when she starts thinking, if I didn't set the right parameters at the beginning, my team has to fix it. Well, then she doesn't have to spend all weekend working to fix something because she didn't set the right parameters in the beginning. She could hand it back to her team on Monday. Obviously, of course, she still wants to scope things out as well as she possibly can in the beginning. She's still a conscientious and caring manager. She's just leaving the extreme version of it, sort of the version that's not very realistic, again, for a fast-moving organization, behind. Okay, so that's the first thought we worked on. The second thought we worked on was, or that I'll share here that we worked on was, I don't want my team to dislike me if I assign them something they don't have capacity for. I'll say that one again. I don't want my team to dislike me if I assign them something they don't have capacity for. Oh, it lands in my body as I say that, because I feel like so many of us think that on some level. And again, she wasn't thinking that consciously. She was just thinking, well, I can't give up my work. But then we crystallized that was why, because she doesn't want them to dislike her. And the context, of course, is that she's worried that if she gives her team more than they have capacity for, because everyone has limited capacity, she's worried they'll be mad at her. And I think that's so honest. I think a lot of us fear that if we were to boil down our own thinking. So I offered her two things. First, I asked, what would happen if you were in their shoes? If your manager delegated something to you that you did not have capacity for? And my client in that moment totally shifted. She's very competent. This client, very skillful at interpersonal relationships. And she just said, I wouldn't be mad. I might not be able or willing to do it, but I'd never be mad. I just explain, what I could or couldn't do and why. And then we explored, could the same be true for direct reports? And I feel kind of a release in my body, a greater openness as I say it, explore this one, and I wonder what it's like for all of you listening to this. And then I also offered her a second idea for this one. I said, could it also be okay if your team has imperfect thoughts about you? Because you do not have perfect thoughts about your manager. I'm going to say that one again. Could it be okay if your team has imperfect thoughts about you? Because you don't have perfect thoughts about your manager either. I knew this client well. We talked a lot about her work in the past, and I knew that she adored and respected her manager. She clearly saw his many strengths. She clearly appreciated them, but she also saw her manager's weaknesses. She really saw them and worked around them as best she could. And he also did some things, frankly, that annoyed her. All of this was true, the whole package, that he had weaknesses, that he did things that annoyed her, while she also overall liked him and respected him and was very glad to work with him. But again, she had imperfect thoughts about him. So that's what I was really asking that client in that moment. Just like you have imperfect thoughts about your manager, like you like him a lot, but sometimes you're annoyed with him, could it be okay if you did something that annoyed one of your direct reports? I'll say that one again because laid in my body as I said it. Just like you have imperfect thoughts about your manager, just like you like him a lot and are also annoyed with him at times, could it be okay if you did something that annoyed one of your direct reports? Can you see how this is like on a deeper level? Like the first thing we were talking about was like, maybe it wouldn't actually annoy your team. But then we were like, but maybe you would annoy your team and maybe that's okay. And even more importantly, I pointed out, isn't it likely that your direct reports already have imperfect thoughts about you? Isn't it likely that just like you feel annoyed with your manager at times, they already feel annoyed with you at times? And what if you could allow that rather than running from it? And this seemed to really land with her because, again, it was getting at this deeper idea that this fear of being disliked and pointing out that, honestly, it's probably already there. So it's not about her doing or not doing something that would make them not feel that way because they probably already do. So that was the second thought we worked on. And then the third thought we worked on was that she had a thought along the lines of, I don't want my direct reports jobs to feel overwhelming or chaotic. I'll say this one again too. I don't want my direct reports jobs to feel overwhelming or chaotic. And clearly, again, if you had a thought like this, it makes sense that you would not delegate projects. You'd think, I might feel overwhelmed or chaotic, but I want to be the boss who protects her team. And that's beautiful. It's noble. You can see why my client has been so successful in so many ways. She is generous and hardworking. And also, I think we can all see, again, why she might be burnt out and exhausted. And in this case, I actually let her keep her desire to have her direct reports' lives not be overwhelming or chaotic. I think that's a true value of hers, and I like that about her. I think that's great. Instead, we explored, she has this thought that the way she's going to protect her direct reports was by not delegating a ton or as much as she could. But was doing that actually making their lives less chaotic or overwhelming? Is it possible that the best way to accomplish this goal of making their life less overwhelming or chaotic would actually be to truly step into leadership, to focus on thinking better, planning better, coaching better as her core roles, which would necessitate a bit more delegation? Again, I'll say that again. Is it possible that the best way to reduce chaos and overwhelm for her team would be to step into true leadership, which involves thinking, planning, coaching more, and as a result also requires more delegation? I think that really landed with her, that that she could keep her goal, but the way she was going about it might not even be the most effective. And I will say, we've been talking about 3 different thoughts she had. I always want to say with mindset work like this, it's very cumulative, right? Sometimes one new thought changes everything. Like I suggest a new thought and the client's like, wow, that changes it all. Now I feel so different. But far more often, what we're doing is kind of like weakening all these different defenses that our brain is putting up. And the cumulative effect of that is that we are less imprisoned by these painful thoughts and more able to access thoughts that serve us better. And over time, this is what happened in my observation for the client. She was able to, in a very noticeable way, step into more true leadership, which involved more strategic thinking and coaching of her team, and also involved delegating them things, even if, for example, the scope changed over time. Okay, so this whole piece, this whole thing I've been talking about so far in this podcast, it's all about all the subtle ways that we can go about reducing our resistance to prioritizing and cutting some things. You know, not doing some projects that aren't actually top priority, going from 7 or 8 or 9 hours of meetings a day to 5 or 6 hours of meetings today. Because just like if we want to save money, we need to buy fewer things. If we want to save energy, we need to spend it on fewer things. Not always, not only, but that's often part of the equation. So I've been talking about that in a lot of detail. Now I want to, for the rest of this podcast, switch gears and talk about the other thing, or not the other thing, but one other thing that can be part of the equation if we want to have some energy in our tanks at the end of the week. Because sometimes cutting things is enough. You know, maybe the things you were committing to weren't that important, so you cut them, and there's really no net decrease in the quality of output, and you naturally have a little more time to do higher priority things. Everything works itself out. But sometimes that's not enough, and we do need to add some additional new things. So that's the next thing I want to talk about. So the fourth thing I'm going to talk about in the overall context of the podcast, second thing today, is about adding things. And in particular, adding work that would really move the needle. Sometimes this is work that clients aren't doing at all. Sometimes this is work that they're doing a tiny bit, but it would be beneficial if they did more. For a large percentage of my clients, there is some kind of cognitively challenging work that they are avoiding or just not having enough time to get to. This varies a bit depending on the person and the role, but to simplify, I'm going to call it strategy work. It's thinking about the big picture of their organization or their work stream or whatever. For one of my clients at a startup, it's thinking about his organization as a whole and where he should really be putting his time in strategically in the next week instead of sort of staying in the weeds and chugging away in his to-do list. For a different client, it might be devoting some time to really think about our company's AI strategy, which on some level, no one officially asked her to do, but if she had a fully baked opinion on it when the issue next came up, it would be extremely impressive to the entire executive team. It would distinguish her. So again, varies a bit depending on the person. This cognitively demanding work, it's important because it's often the highest value work we can really do in the long term. And also because if we don't do it, we may end up overcompensating with just more hours worked because we didn't scope the project completely or we didn't think about priorities as strategically as we could. So we're just trying to over deliver with pure man hours or woman hours. And that, of course, as you can imagine, as we talked about before, becomes this vicious cycle because then you're more and more tired from the extra working time, so you can't actually do the more cognitively demanding work. I've written before in my newsletter about how you lose access to what I call the cognitive sharpness lever if you overdo it on the hours lever. So something that comes up with many of my clients, first of all, is even just having the mental space in our session to name what it is, this high value activity that they are either completely not doing or not doing as much as they need to. And then second, we will think together about when that could happen within their work week. And perhaps it goes without being said, but there is a reason why I put this particular point after my previous ones, because if you're slammed with work and like teetering on the edge of burnout, then of course, making time for strategic thinking feels impossible. Uh, we need to clear out a little bit of room before we can have that conversation. But if you have cut out 5 hours, 10 hours of work in a week in projects that you're not doing or meetings you're no longer attending, and then we add in 1 to 2 hours of really good cognitively demanding or strategic thinking, because frankly, that's often all we're actually adding, that can make a huge difference. Okay, so I want to say two things sort of on the practical, tactical level about how we go about adding these 1 to 2 hours in. First of all, in my dreams for my clients, we pick a recurring time. So as an example, I have a client who added this time on Wednesday mornings after she dropped her daughter off at daycare. She'll drop her daughter off and then go to this coffee shop she likes, get a coffee and a raspberry croissant, and do some big picture thinking about her work. But the routine of it was really good because for two things. First of all, if it's recurring, then hopefully it's kind of blocked off on your calendar so nothing gets scheduled over it. Everyone kind of knows, mostly not to schedule things over it. And then also it begins to get incorporated within the rhythm of your week. And we've been kind of avoiding this because it's hard. But when it's part of the routine, then I think it's often easier to do. So that's the first thing I'll say about sort of tactically how I think about incorporating it. And the second thing I'll say is that my clients often need revised expectations about how cognitively intense work happens. I'll say that sentence again. My clients sometimes need different expectations about how cognitively intense work happens. So I mentioned this client of mine who did her deep thinking time after she dropped off her daughter at daycare and she got this raspberry croissant at a coffee shop. I love that for her because it was a really smart choice about when to do it because her brain was fresh first thing in the morning. Many of us may not have that option. So instead, we had this hour blocked off on our calendar for deep thinking time or strategic thinking time at 2 p.m. And it might come after like 5 hours in a row of crazy stressful meetings. And what happens as soon as we get off those meetings is that we are completely fried in our brains and we cannot think straight. But we want to be productive. We have this hour. It's planned. So sometimes what will happen is that a client will be so fried and they'll be like, I need to be productive. I have this hour. And then they'll end up just responding to emails or doing some lower value task during that hour. And they may not even consciously realize what's happening, but often what is happening, if we really sit back and reflect on it, is that their brains are tired and doing cognitively intense work is just not available to them in that moment. So even though they have the time blocked off, even though they have that plan, they're not going to do it. I think this lands with this is so relatable, I think, to anybody who's in any kind of knowledge working space. So for many of my clients who are trying to do cognitively intense work in the middle of our work days, when our brains are already fried, we need to find a way to get some cognitive rest in as we ease in to that cognitively challenging work. So they need to plan for a bit of cognitive rest and transition time. I'm going to say that one again because I don't want you to forget it because it's so important. They need to plan for some cognitive rest and transition time. They might need to get up and walk around the building a bit. They might need to walk to the window and stare out of it. Maybe they need to go grab some lunch if they haven't gotten actual lunch yet. For one of my clients, that became our expectation that the first 10 to 20 minutes of her hour-long strategy time, she's probably just like coming down from the rest of our day. That is not to say that she's checking emails. Checking emails is not going to help you come down from the rest of your day. It seems appealing, and obviously you have emails that need checking, but it's not actually going to help you transition. But this client, for a lot of working on it together, we get up, go to the bathroom, kind of mill around the floor for office buildings, stand by the window and stare out. That whole thing might take 20 minutes. And we did not make that a problem, because her brain needed that time to slowly ramp up for what it needed to do. And even if that hour of blocked off time had 20 minutes of kind of cognitive mush, it was still an important, effective hour, because otherwise there might be 0 minutes of that time happening on her calendar. She might just be emailing and reacting. And also some of that time that kind of looked unproductive from the outside, she's sort of milling around, she's looking out the window. Actually, during that time, she's gearing up in her brain. She's thinking, okay, what am I going to work on? Okay, what are my goals that are realistic for this next 40 minutes? What does success look like? She's actually getting started in some key ways that are not on a computer. So I just want to make sure you remember that. If you want some cognitively challenging time, some kind of gentle startup, often not on the screen, because a tired brain in front of a screen will often default to activities like email that are not actually restful, but some sort of gentle startup is often a really important part of this process. Okay, so team, that is the second point I wanted to make on this podcast. Sometimes just adding a bit, 1 to 2 hours of cognitively demanding important work into your work week may also make you less tired at the end of the work week, because you know that you did the most important things. You made important decisions or did important strategic thinking or whatever you wanted to do. And you stop then overcompensating with more total hours worked. So it's a good use of time on a lot of levels. Just taking a breath. That's so much, right? I'm going to end today's podcast here. I think you can feel how this whole thing could be a whole coaching engagement. There's so much to say. I'm going to give another summary, a cumulative summary, because our brains, I think, all need summaries and summaries of summaries. If you are having trouble saving fuel in your tank at the end of your work week, at least 4 things could be happening. Number 1, you literally just forget. Number 2, you aren't sold on how this is important, not just for you, but for your organization as a whole. Number 3, you're doing too much, so you need to prioritize and do less. And 3, you're not doing enough of the cognitively challenging or strategic work that you truly need to do, so you're compensating with overall hours worked. There's more to say, team. I think the next episode's going to be my last. And it's going to be a really good one. Can't wait to tell you all about it. I'll talk to you soon. And in the meantime, I'll be rooting for you. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.